Hello and welcome to the Sia Admissions session at MBA Spotlight. My name is Faiza Taj and I'm your host. It is also my pleasure to present to you Susan Berishaj, the founder of Sia Admissions, and also Danae Anderson, the admission consultant at Sia Admissions. We are going to start with a quick overview of the services that they provide and also critical information you need to know to be successful in your MBA applications. After the brief presentation, we will open it up for Q&A and we'll take as many questions as possible. For everyone in the audience, we have a great way for you to engage and post your questions. On your screen on the bottom, there is a tab that has a Q&A. That's the perfect place for you to ask your questions. Please don't ask your questions in the chat bar. You can chat, but don't ask questions. And also make sure that you are going to upvote questions you want to be answered. At the end, I will be picking the most upvoted questions from the Q&A tab. Thank you for being with us today. And now I will turn it over to Susan Berishaj for her presentation. Thank you so much, Susan, for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Faiza. It's wonderful to be here, and I know a lot of applicants are anxious as we approach round two, so I'm really glad to be able to be part of this conversation.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
And just a note that Danae is going to be answering questions in the chat, so please ask as many questions as you want. And then at the end, I will be presenting. I will be answering questions as well, live.
Awesome.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you again. I'm excited to be here because what we're going to be covering in the next 20 to 25 minutes is going to fundamentally change how you think about your MBA application. And for some of you, it may be uncomfortable. So the reality is that most of you in the room will submit essays that undermine your candidacy, not because you are bad writers, not because your stories aren't compelling, but because you fundamentally misunderstand what the admission committees are actually evaluating when they read your essays. Over the next 25 minutes, I'm going to show you the gaps between what you think matters and what actually matters in the application. And by the end, you'll understand why the strongest candidates, the ones who get into Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, other M7s, and INSEAD and LBS top European schools, approach essays completely different than everyone else. So let's get started. First thing, let's start with the most dangerous assumptions that applicants make. That admission is additive, that if you have a 700 GMAT focus score, 3 years at McKinsey or Google, and a strong undergraduate degree and or performance, the essays are just the packaging. This is backward thinking. Your GMAT score, it got you past the initial screen. It proved that you can handle the academic rigor. But what most applicants don't realize, at schools like Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, M7s, the top European schools, about 70 to 80% of applicants are academically qualified. Think about what that means. The vast majority of people applying can do the work. So the essays aren't there to prove you're smart. They're there to answer a completely different question. Why you and why here? And this is where everything falls apart for most applicants, because you can't answer the question with the same approach you got your 700 GMAT score or a promotion at work. This requires a different kind of thinking entirely. And the mindset shift you need to make right now is that your GMAT got you to the table, but your story gets you the seat. And that's where we're going to be unpacking in this session further. So If essays are just about writing quality, what are admission committees actually evaluating? Most applicants think that the goal rather is to write well, to be articulate, to tell an impressive story. And yes, those things matter for sure, but they're table stakes. A lot of people are going to do the same exact things as you. What actually separates admits from rejection is something much more specific that we've seen time and again over the past almost decade that we've been coaching. Top MBA programs are evaluating 3 things that most applicants never explicitly express. The first thing is a strategic self-awareness. This isn't just about knowing your strength, it's demonstrating that you understand why you've made the choices that you've made, what patterns exist in your decision-making, and what gaps you're aware of in your development. So the difference between saying I'm a strong leader and showing I realized my analytical strength was actually preventing me from building the kind of influence I need is the difference between a rejection and an interview invite. Second is a contribution thesis. They're not asking, will you succeed in our program alone? They're asking, what will you add to our classroom that wouldn't be there without you? This is why career changers, career switchers often struggle. They focus on what they want to get out of the business school program rather than what they will be giving to and bringing to the MBA program. And the admission team can really smell that difference from miles away because they've been doing this for a very long time. Third is narrative coherence. And this is one that definitely kills a lot of applicants. So your resume says one thing, your essays says another thing, your recommender letter emphasizes different qualities, and the admission committee, when they read your application, they're left trying to figure out who you actually are. They are not going to do the work for you, right? If your application doesn't tell one coherent story across all components, the outcome is inevitable, a rejection. What is critical to understand is that you can have an objectively impressive background, and we see this so often, and fail on all 3 of these dimensions. And this happens just way too much for us to not actually address this and talk about it more, because this mindset shift starts before you submit your applications. Now, we're going to talk about 3 major mistakes that applicants make and how to think about them differently, right? So let's most of you are going to make at least one of these mistakes, and you're going to struggle to realize until you have rejections and you're speaking with experts to understand like what happened, right? We want to try to avoid that. You're going through this process and you want to make sure you have a successful outcome in your application. So the first mistake that applicants make is a generic leadership narrative. So here's how that sounds. Something like, I led a team of 5 people to increase revenue by 20%. Through this experience, I learned the importance of communication and perseverance, right? I'm sure that something like this you have somewhere in your application, right, at this stage. And this is what 90% of essays sound like. And here's why it fails. It's not that the story isn't true, right? It's that it tells the admission committee nothing about how you think and why you made specific decisions, or what you bring to their classroom is what they're looking for. So think about it from the admissions officer's perspective, right? They're reading about 50 essays a day. 45 of them say a version of I lead a team, faced challenges, overcame obstacles, learned valuable lessons. What's different if all of them sound the same? What they're actually looking for is, what did you notice that others didn't? What trade-offs did you make and why? What surprised you about yourself in that moment? What would you do differently now? The fatal flaw here is confusing what happened with why it matters, right? And why it matters is when you get when you move from foundational, elementary, to elevating it to an application that gets the attention of the reader. The admission teams, they see, revenue increases left and right. It's not that interesting. Obviously, they want to see it, but it's not that interesting. They care about what you learned about yourself, about people, about organizations, and how that learning will shape what you bring to the program, to the classroom discussions and engagement you're going to have for the next 2 years in business school. Fatal mistake number 2 is declaring instead of demonstrating. So this is a mistake that people with genuinely impressive qualities make. They tell the admission committee about their strengths rather than letting the committee discover those strengths through their stories. So oftentimes people are a little bit confused about what the nuances look like. So declaring looks like, I am analytical and data-driven. I am passionate about social impact. I am collaborative, even if they don't use them in those same exact phrasing. The problem with this is that anyone can write those words. Anyone. The admission committee don't believe claims, don't believe philosophies, don't believe anything that they cannot witness through storytelling, of course. So they're going to believe evidence. So demonstrating looks completely different. Instead of saying I'm analytical, you show how you approach the problem, what data you examined, what you chose to prioritize and what you chose to ignore, and what that reveals about your thinking. And why this matters so much is when you declare qualities, you're essentially assuming the admission committee, or you're asking the admission committee to trust you. When you demonstrate qualities through specific moments, choices, and reflections, you're giving them no choice but to see those qualities for themselves and let them come to that conclusion. And the second problem with declaring it is that it creates distance. It makes your essays feel like a performance. You're trying to convince someone something, but there's no evidence for them to see you in action. So, but when you provide evidence through demonstration, you're creating an intimacy moment with the reader. It brings the reader into your experience and lets them form their own conclusion, which is exactly what we want them to feel when they read your materials, the different parts of your application. And fatal mistake number 3 is misalignment between story and strategy. So this is where I see a lot of self-sabotage form, particularly with brilliant candidates. And what does that look like? Your essays tell a compelling story about your passion for technology or innovation. You state your post-MBA goals is going to be tech startup or launch your own company, but you're applying to a finance-heavy program known for producing investment bankers, or you're applying to a school with limited tech recruiting and no strong venture capital ecosystem. The admission committee reads this and thinks one of 2 things. 1, either you don't understand what the school actually offers, which is problematic in and of itself, and 2, you are not being honest about your goals. And would you want that in your community? Both can be killers of your application. And this misalignment sometimes happens in more subtle ways, right? Not just complete misalignment between goals and schools. You say that you want to transition from consulting to healthcare, but your essays never actually address why you haven't done that, what's holding you back, and why an MBA is a necessary bridge. You claim you want to work in international development, but you've never demonstrated any international experience or cultural competency. The fix here isn't manufacturing experiences you don't have. The fix is to ensure that every element of your application, so that means your background, your goals, your school choices, form that logical through line that connects everything together. If that through line doesn't exist, you're applying to the wrong school, or you're not being honest about your goals, or you haven't done enough exploration to articulate why this specific path makes sense for you. And again, the admission committee can spot manufactured alignment miles away. There's no gaming that. What they're looking for is that inevitable alignment with your application, with you as a candidate. So when your past experiences, your future aspirations, and their program offerings all work together naturally, rejecting you would be a mistake. And that's what you want them to conclude after reading the full application that you put forth. So let's talk through what works, because the strongest applicants don't just have good essays, they have a strategic architecture of their entire application. So what do I mean by architecture of an application? Most applicants treat each component of their application as separate entities or separate tasks even. You write your resume, then you write essay 1, then you write essay 2, then you brief your recommenders. Each piece is created in isolation. And this is absolutely backward thinking. The most successful applicants, the ones that get multiple M7 admits, and we see this time and time again, they understand that they're not creating separate documents. They're building a coherent narrative system where every single piece reinforces and builds upon the other piece that they have shared in another part of the application. So they're not in isolation. Collectively, they put forth the mosaic of who is the candidate that is applying. So your resume isn't just a list of your accomplishments. It's the foundation that your essays will build on. If your resume emphasizes your analytical capabilities, your essays should better show the human judgment and interpersonal complexity to balance that analytic background. If your resume shows a clear trajectory in one industry, your essay needs to either deepen that narrative or explain the inflection point, especially if you are making transitions. Your recommendation letters aren't just endorsements of you as a candidate. They're opportunities to have someone else validate specific qualities your essays are going to demonstrate. So if your essays show a moment where you had to influence without authority, one of your recommenders should be someone who witnessed that, and their letter should provide the external perspective on that same capability that you write about in your essays. Your goal statement isn't just about what you want to do after graduation. It's the connective tissue that links your past experiences to your future aspirations and explains why the school at this point in your career is the necessary bridge for you to go from where you are to where you want to be, both short and long term. When all of these pieces work together, the admission committee doesn't just understand what you've done, they understand who you are, how you think, and what you'll contribute to their program. And because you are putting each of these pieces together collectively and not in isolation, they can visualize you in their classroom and what kind of contributions you're going to be making. And that's when you go from being a strong candidate with strong test scores, strong career journey, to being someone who actively gets multiple admits. And again, we see this every single cycle. Now, let's talk a little bit about school-specific strategy, because this is where a lot of applicants waste enormous amounts of time applying the wrong approach to the wrong school. So every top program talks about leadership. They all want collaborative team players. They all value analytical rigor and global perspective. And I hear this so many times. Applicants look at these schools and they're like, every single one of them wants the same thing. But what is the underlying problem that an applicant, as they're just evaluating online, they don't get to see, is that leadership in this instance, in this isolation, means radically different things at different schools. So I'm going to give you a few examples to illustrate this. Harvard evaluates leadership through a lens of impact and scale. They want to know, what did you build? What did you change? What is different in the world because you were there? Their case method means they also are looking for people who can synthesize complexity and influence others through their own thinking, through their ideas. GSB talks about leadership too, but what they're really evaluating is intellectual vitality, your capacity to think originally, to question assumptions, to bring genuine fresh perspective to a classroom. A Stanford essay that would work, Stanford essay, excuse me, that would work at HBS would likely feel too conventional if you choose to use it for the other school, right? Wharton wants analytical rigor demonstrated through specificity. So vague claims like increasing efficiency are not enough. They're vague, like anyone can say that again. They want to know, what was the model? What were the variables? How did you stress test your assumption? And leadership at Wharton is proven through analytical capabilities, right? LBS and INSEAD both emphasize global mindset, but even here, there are differences in terms of how they evaluate candidates. LBS tends to value depth of international experience and cultural fluency demonstrated through specific examples. INSEAD's shorter or accelerated program means they're looking for people who already have clarity about their trajectory, because there's less room to explore, given that it's a one-year program. The mistake most applicants make is writing one core essays and then making superficial adjustments for each school. Changing Wharton to Stanford in your sort of why this program, why this school, does not work. It will never work. What works is understanding what each school is actually optimizing for in their class and how they're putting their class together, and then examining your own experiences through that lens. You're not changing your story because you have lived your experiences, but what you're doing is you're adjusting which aspect of your story you're emphasizing and how you are going to frame them that is specific for the school. You don't have the space to write an autobiography. You have to be selective in what you include and also take on a perspective on how you present those experiences to the admission team. So now let me address the biggest misconception that proves not proves, but it's going to prevent people from getting help. The belief that if you have a story, if you know what stories you want to tell, the hard part is done. Everything else is easy. And that is the biggest false assumption that you can make in this process. The framing of how you tell your story is what determines whether your application succeeds or fails. And this is where I see the most talented people sabotage themselves because of this initial mindset. So here's an example of what I mean. Two applicants, both consultants, who led digital transformation project, same level of impact, same business results or similar business results. Applicant A framed it as, I led implementation of a new CRM system that improves sales efficiency by 30%. Applicant B framed that same experience differently. Like, I had to convince a 55-year-old sales director to abandon the Excel system he'd been using for 20 years. The data was on my side, but the relationship wasn't. Here's what I learned about change management versus change leadership. You listening to me tell those two nuances, see the difference. You can see with your mind's eye which story is more compelling. How are you evaluating? How are you seeing this experience between the two? One is showcasing just the data points. The other one is letting you into their world by giving you specifics on what challenges they faced and what they had to do. So the framing here is extremely important, right? If we look at these two, applicant A gets a rejection, applicant B gets an interview. The difference, applicant A told the admission committee what happened, whereas applicant B showed how they think through those minutiae details in letting them into their story, into their life and experiences. So this is why essays for MBA application or MBA admission is so deceptively difficult. It's not about being a good writer in the traditional sense. It's about understanding what the admission committee needs to see and then structuring your experiences to reveal exactly that without feeling manufactured. And most people can't do this alone, not because they're not smart enough, but because you're too close to your own story. You don't see the blind spots. You don't know which details matter and which ones don't. You don't know what the admission committee already assumes versus what they need to see you prove. You don't know when you're being generic versus when you're being authentically distinctive. And oftentimes I have conversations with clients where they're telling me, oh, that story may not be that interesting, and becomes the cornerstone of everything we write. This is why the strongest candidates don't go it alone. I'm sure you've heard it takes a village. The same thing with the application. The strong candidates, what they do is they get expert eyes on their materials, not to write for them, of course, never, but to help them see their own experiences from an admission perspective, from a different lens than they are accustomed to. Of course, it's your story, right? So as we come to a close, here's where we are at the moment. You know, or you now understand, hopefully, that essays aren't just about writing quality. They're about strategic self-awareness, having a contribution thesis and a narrative coherence across all components of the application. You understand the fatal mistakes that kill applicants, which are generic leadership narratives, declaring instead of demonstrating, and misalignment between your story and your strategy. You also understand that you're not just writing separate documents, you're architecting a candidacy where every piece reinforces the other, not just in what you write, but also what the recommenders share. And you also understand that the same story can either build or destroy your application depending on how it's being framed and for which school. So the question isn't whether you need an expert perspective on your materials. The question is, you know, if you're applying to schools, the M7s, top 10, US, European schools, you understand that you are competing against people who have that perspective. The real question is, do you want to discover what you're doing or what you're not doing during the application process or beforehand when you have time to actually course correct before you submit your applications? If you're interested in discussing how we can support you, I invite you to book a consultation. There's going to be a link in the chat somewhere. If you go to Sia Admissions,
I added the website. Please visit siaadmissions.com. And if you want to schedule a consultation, and also you can visit their Instagram if you want to ask questions under their posts.
Absolutely, yes. And then we also do offer profile evaluations. If you're not ready to commit to a consultation, but just want your profile reviewed, you can do that. We provide profile reviews in a written format. So on our website, you can find that same information. Now, I would love to open, I think we have 15 minutes, Faiza?
I think we have, yes, we have 15 minutes. Thank you so much, Susan, for very insightful session. I took a lot of notes. And I'm going to ask a few questions that are uh,
Please,
Q&A, and I would really appreciate if you can answer.
absolutely.
Uh, Dorothy asked if a GMAT or GRE test is optional and your scores are not great.
Yeah, it depends on where you're applying, but for top 20 schools, they're not optional. Some schools do offer waivers, but I typically discourage applicants from requesting a waiver because you're essentially saying to the school, can you make an exception for me? And then what you're presenting to them is has to be stronger than the applicants who are actually applying with the test scores in hand. So the probability of getting in is very low without test. So I really discourage applicants to apply without a test just because of probability. But our focus here at Sia Admissions is top 20. I don't know exactly which school you're applying to. So if there are other schools, then I'm sure I would look into those details with them specifically.
Thank you so much. Regarding the test scores, what do you think about TOEFL? Should we negotiate with the schools or we should just take the exam? And if the score is expired and we were something like that.
Yeah, schools do have requirements. So if you did not study in English in undergraduate, if your work hasn't been, or typically is the method of study that you've had in university. If it was not in English, they will require you to submit a TOEFL or, English proficiency test. And it's typically not negotiable. But I would maybe look at the school and see what evidence you can provide to them. Sometimes they say if you've worked for 10 years in the US, then, or something along those lines, then there can be some nuances in the sort of the fine print. But typically, the standard is if you did not study in English, you should be submitting a English proficiency exam, a valid one.
Even if it's negotiable, do you even suggest negotiation and putting your name out as a person who wants a specific treatment?
Yeah, you play it by ear. If I personally am not a fan of special treatments, at least from the application perspective, just because there's always something that has to overcompensate for the thing that you took out that everyone is evaluated on, right? But if you feel like you have a really strong candidacy, but you don't have time to take the TOEFL, if they give you a waiver, take the waiver, but then in the process after you submit your application, I would still take it because just to kind of put it out there and make sure that they have the information they need to make actual informed decisions. Because I know like we are, a month and a half away to round two deadlines, excuse me.
Thank you. And regarding the volunteering jobs that they ask, like activities, extra activities, how can we prove that we had that volunteering job or volunteering work?
So you mean background checks?
No, for example, we say, okay, we are part of this nonprofit or charitable organization. Do they send an email and ask them, or they just trust us?
They do confirm background checks to the extent that they can. Sometimes things are not possible to do based on the kind of organization. Maybe the organization is no longer active or something like that, but they do have a background check, and part of that background check is looking at everything you've included in the formal application portal document, which is like the formal submission where you sign that everything is accurate and everything is truthful in your application.
Awesome. And someone asked, entrepreneurship goals risk. Would international candidates typically able to go full-time into entrepreneurship right after graduation if they've already been building during their MBA? I'm thinking how practical stuff like visa, incorporation, etc., may impact international candidates with entrepreneurship goals?
Yeah, so I have a former client who is currently at Berkeley, and she's starting her entrepreneurship venture while she is there, and she's an international applicant. What she did there specifically was get partnerships with people who are US residents, that facilitated some of those details. But I would say, first and foremost, the entrepreneurship goals risk is dependent on where you're coming from, and not where you're coming from geographically, but where you're coming from in terms of your experiences. So if you have never been an entrepreneur before and you're pitching entrepreneurship, I would say, especially entrepreneurship post MBA, I would say is a huge risk from an admissions perspective, because there's no evidence that you can do it. And as we know, a lot of entrepreneurial ventures fail, right? So what they don't want is you don't have a business by the time you graduate, and then you don't have a job by the time you graduate, because obviously, like, to run a business, you have to dedicate a lot of your free time to it, and in recruiting, you have to dedicate a lot of your free time to, right? So you would have to be managing those two. So those are the nuances that you would have to consolidate and think through. But if you do have entrepreneurial experience and you don't need additional training, like you are looking for sort of the business approach to how you're going to make the business function and work, with the help of a business school and the entrepreneurial ecosystem that's there, then that's great. Otherwise, maybe you can do entrepreneurship long term.
Awesome. I want to add that there is a risk that schools see this kind of entrepreneurship kind of jeopardize the employment rates and the outcome.
Exactly. And you're not going to be happy at the same time as an applicant.
I have a question myself. I see that they're answering a lot of questions on the Q&A. I see a lot of resume templates from different schools. Most of them, they bring education first and then professional experience. What do you think? Should we bring professional experience first or education first?
I am of the opinion that you bring first what you want to emphasize first. So if your education is the proudest thing, then put your education first. If your work experience is the proudest thing, then you put your work experience first. That's my perspective. And what we've seen with the clients that we work with succeed is most of them, yes, you have people who are coming from, Stanfords and Princetons and Harvards and all of these backgrounds. And you may say, oh, like, I want to emphasize that. But always the question is going to be, well, why are you emphasizing that versus your career? Shouldn't you be more proud of what you've accomplished since than what you've done for undergraduate?
Awesome. Would you recommend bringing that professional summary, one paragraph at the first or not?
Like a job description?
Yeah,
Oh,
like the summary that they bring, objective or something at the first of the resume.
Your objective for business school is get in. So no need to include that. No need to waste a line for that. You just talk about, experiences, education, extracurricular interests, skill sets that you bring to the table, things that are unique. Not unique as in no one else has done them, but like things that make you unique.
Awesome. A lot of schools have an extra essay for the reapplicants. What recommendation or suggestion you have for that?
That is a really, really important essay question for applicants who are reapplying. And the reason is, yes, you've shared news stories. Hopefully you're not repurposing what didn't work the first time around. So you're sharing news stories, but a part of this process is also a reflection. Have you reflected on your failures? What did you learn from your failures, and what actions did you take as a result of your learnings, right? They want to see significant transformation, not just a test retake. They want to see what you've accomplished in the typical year or so, 6 months maybe, since you last applied. What has changed that they didn't know previously. So it's a really important essay to be able to showcase maturity, showcase growth in your character, and that you are even more ready now than you were however long ago you applied to be not only a competitive candidate, but also someone who's going to bring a lot of contribution to the team, to the community there.
Do they usually check the previous application when you reapply?
They can, because you will identify as a reapplicant. They will ask you what year did you apply, and if they want to see, they can go back to those files and look at your candidacy.
And there is a part for the, for example, GRE or GMAT scores, and they ask, please tick this, choose this box if you took the exams multiple times.
Mhm.
If you added a score which is not very good last year, should you bring it again because they can see it, or you should just skip it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think applicants think of it like an exam in a class. They think of the GMAT or the GRE as an exam in the class, whereas like, oh, I failed this, I don't really want to talk about it, you know? But the business schools are actually looking at it differently. They're seeing it as, do you have the perseverance to continue to do something when it's really, really hard and really uncomfortable, and that you can demonstrate growth. So having a low score that you had last year, but you were able to improve, and now you have a really strong score, that is not just a score, improved score perspective, but also it's a evidence of your character, of someone who is not going to settle with just the baseline.
What if it's so low and we decide to not bring it? Do you think that they will see it as a negative, like lying?
If you are a reapplicant and they ask you, tell me about your scores without a time frame attached to it, then yes, they will see it as such, because they have the opportunity to see what you completed last year.
Wow. Thank you so much. We have just 1 minute left. Is there anything that you want to add regarding the essays, the applications, and in general?
Yeah. I think we covered a lot in our presentation, and I would say I would encourage everyone to have your baseline information ready, like baseline essays, baseline, like everything baseline ready by the end of the month. And I know you'll say like, oh my God, but why should I do that? And I have another month to work through the application. What separates applicants who get in multiple schools versus the ones who don't is the level of intensity, the level of reflection that happens in the actual essays. And you can't do that if your baseline is not there. You can't build a house if the foundation is not there, right? So have the foundation ready a month in advance, and then make it as beautiful as you want from there, based on, the insights, the reflections that you have time to think through before you submit for round 2.
So what you're saying is have enough time to get some feedbacks on your application before submitting.
Feedback, but also for you to reflect. If you are trying to put all of your applications together last minute, you don't have time to reflect and think about and step away from your materials to say, okay, does this really capture who I am? Even if you're not getting feedback, but especially if you're getting feedback because you're relying on other people's availability as well.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Personally, I really enjoyed the session. I took 4 pages of notes.
Love it.
You. Again, I want to emphasize that there is their website, siaadmissions.com. You can refer to their website, and if you want to book a consultation, feel free to do that. And we really appreciate you and your time. And it was very great to meet you face to face.
Absolutely. Same here. Thanks again for putting this together and asking such wonderful questions.
Have a wonderful day, Diana. Have a wonderful day and see you later on other sessions. Bye.
Bye.